Okay.
3, 2.
Hello there and welcome. My name is Michelle. I'm the Adult Services Librarian. I'm going to have to pause that. Give me 1 minute. All right, take 2. Take 2. All right. Hello, I'm Michelle. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at Goffstown Public Library, and this is our first virtual adult program. We're so excited to have you. We're coming to you today live from the Goffstown Public Library through our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our page if you haven't already, as we plan on offering more live adult programs in the future. So this is a different type of program than usual, but we still have our fabulous presenters and the ability to ask questions. You should see a bar on the right-hand side of your screen. Type your questions in and let us know. We'll be monitoring it throughout the program, so you'll have your voice heard and your questions answered. Like I said, we're so excited to have you here today to hear from Nancy Ann Feren, author of Not Your Average Travelers, 40 Years of Adventures in the U.S. National Parks. It's available for sale on Amazon as well as for rent from your local library. So without any further ado, we're going to pass it over to Nancy Ann Feren, who's got some charming stories and wonderful photographs about her history of traveling the United States and visiting all the national parks.
Hello. It's interesting to be here doing a presentation in a different format than I've ever done before, but I'm excited to do so. My husband and I have visited all the units in the national park system, 419 the last time I checked, but it changes every time we take a trip. A new park or a new monument or a new memorial is added, or one changes from one status to another. We are not your average travelers for a couple of different reasons. One of them, this slide that's up there is showing you, is that we camp in a tent all the time, or almost all the time. We started out in a much larger tent because we were traveling with children. As they grew up and moved away, we downsized to a 2-person tent. The last time that we needed to buy a new tent, we had an interesting exchange in the store. We had found what looked like an appropriate tent for us and went to find a clerk to buy the tent. She looked at what we were thinking of and she said, "There isn't room in a 2-man tent for cots." I replied, "We don't use cots. Yes, we sleep on the ground on thin foam pads and we love it." The clerk said, "You need more room for your gear." I said, "We leave our gear in the car and just bring in 2 small cloth bags with clothes for the next day." The clerk said, "You won't be able to stand up." "We don't stand up in our tent. We crawl in and go to sleep." And she said, "Oh, then maybe you do want a 2-man tent." And that is what we bought. We started our travels in 1977 with our 2 young children at Acadia National Park and rapidly expanded to go across country. So in 1980, we made our first cross-country trip. We asked each of the kids to keep a journal. They were 8 and 10 at the 2 8-year-olds and a 10-year-old at the time. And we kept journals as well. Much of the book is based on the journals that we kept. This was one of our first stops at Gateway Arch National Park. It was not a national park when we went there, it was a monument. But we loved seeing all the things that had to do with the westward expansion of the United States and Lewis and Clark's travels there. From there, we moved on across the country to Great Sand Dunes National Park. You can see the dunes in the background and the water in the front. We arrived just in time to go for a barefoot walk in what is snowmelt that came from the mountains. Then on to Mesa Verde National Park. Our children loved Mesa Verde because they could explore where the Native Americans had their homes. You can see those homes there. This is one of the parks that has changed since we were there because there's danger of rockfall in some of these places, and you can't get as up close as we were able to get when we were there. You can see this is one of the buildings, the adobe buildings that we were able to explore. Then we went on to the Everglades. All right, yes. We've had two experiences in the Everglades, two very different experiences each time we went. The first time we went in August. It is hot in Florida in August, and the mosquitoes are horrendous. We went to a campground, went to the National Park campground, and we're told that we could stay there. It was free, but the mosquitoes were terrible, and we should go somewhere else. And they directed us to another park. When we got to that park, I think it was a state park or possibly a private one, there was a sign that said, "Mosquitoes are terrible, no refunds." So we paid for the mosquitoes that time. The second time we went in at the end of January, early February, and it was cold. It was unusually cold. It was below freezing cold with a strong wind, but we still camped in our little tent. This is a roseate spoonbill, which is my very favorite bird, I think. We could have watched him all day in that park. Down there, we also went to the mangrove swamp in, I can't think the name of the park. I'll tell you in a second. Great, yeah, Big Cypress National Park. And canoed through there, seeing lots of different animals, such as alligators and crocodiles and snakes. And another trip in Florida went to Dry Tortugas National Park. This one you get to by a catamaran or a ferry, or you can fly in as well. We got on the boat that was going to take us out, and we're told that the weather was okay, would be all right going out. It might be really strong coming back. And if anyone wanted to not travel, they could get their money back. We didn't have another day, and we were already committed to going to all the parks, so we continued out. Going out was fine. And this is a Civil War fort. It was never actually used as a fort. It was used for prisoners during the Civil War. It was, and after the Civil War. It housed one of the doctors, Dr. Mudd, who treated John Wilkes Booth after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Then there was a yellow fever epidemic, and he was pardoned by President Johnson because he did such a good job helping with the epidemic. This Fort Jefferson is also a place where Cuban refugees came a few years ago. This is the Chug, which it's called, that they came. If they got to land, to the island, they were treated as refugees. It was wet foot, dry foot policy. If they were still in the water, they would be sent back to where they had come from, to Cuba. This is a picture of the Badlands, right?
Yes.
In South Dakota, where we did a lot of hiking. Go ahead. These are two of our children at the in the Badlands. And of course, we had to go to Yellowstone. As I said, our children kept journals. So let me read you a little bit of our daughter's journal from Yellowstone. She was 11 at the time. Feelings of Yellowstone. We're at Yellowstone. Today, it is a very cold morning. It was cold last night, too. When I woke up, I had expected to be in my nice, soft, warm bed. But no, I shook my head. Now I remembered. On the way here, it was so beautiful. You could see the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Occasionally, I would see a mountain bluebird flying from branch to branch, or a robin looking for worms, or making a nest. I could feel my ears popping as my family and I went up the mountains. Sometimes it hurt, but most of the time I wouldn't mind. As soon as we saw the sign that said "Welcome to Yellowstone National Park" coming into view, I remembered the anxious feeling in my stomach through our whole trip from New Hampshire to Wyoming, chanting, "Let's get to Yellowstone, let's get to Yellowstone." The suspense had been killing me. Now we were there, free from suspense at long last. While I'm looking at the children's journals, let me read you two more. This is from our son Andrew, who was 17 at the time, and we were in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. After packing up, we boarded the Feren mobile and were served a breakfast of strawberry bread, orange juice, and bananas. As we proceeded down Skyline Drive at nowhere near warp speed, we were able to enjoy the clearest view we had ever had there. The panoramic view, however, was still far from pristine. Upon awakening, I was granted permission to serve as temporary pilot along the drive. I served in this capacity until slightly before the noon hour, at which point I surrendered control of the vehicle to the veteran navigator, Richard B. Feren. And it continues like that. And then David, same year, he was 15. And keep in mind that he is now an English teacher. And he wrote, "See Dick, see Nancy Ann, see their family, see them wake up and yawn, 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 yawn. See them pack the car. Pack, Dick, pack, Nancy Ann. See them go for a drive. Vroom, vroom. See the road. It has many turns. Turn, Dick, turn, Nancy Ann. See the family eat lunch. Munch, munch, munch. See them driving down the road with many twists and turns. Nancy Ann is reading things from a booklet. The family sees the things Nancy Ann is reading about. Read, read, read. See, see, see." It continues on quite a ways like that, and then ends with, "David combed his hair and took a shower. Scrub, scrub, scrub. See the family sleep. Zzz. Good night, family." So they were becoming creative in their writing and making the most of being in the car for long periods of time. Here's another view. The last one obviously was Old Faithful. These are salt pools at salt terraces at Yellowstone as well. When we were there, the first day we picked up a guide that told what animals were available or that you could see in the park, and you got 10 points for each one that you saw. We saw everything on the list except for a bear that day. And the kids were very impressed that we were seeing all these animals. We eventually did see bears in other places, as you will see as we go along. This is our view. This is one reason we love camping. This was the view from our tent when we woke up in the morning in Grand Tetons National Park. And another thing that we particularly love about camping is being up close and personal with the animals. You are not supposed to interact with them. You're not supposed to feed them. However, they sometimes take matters into their own hands. This ground squirrel was testing a pancake that we had on the picnic table. When we were at Great Sand Dunes, a deer came right up to the table and took a donut off the table. I went to get the camera, and Dick shooed the deer away, so we didn't get a picture of him. But we try not to feed them. We try not to do what we're not supposed to do, but sometimes it happens. Here is a bison at Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. The field was full of prairie dogs and bison, right on the side of the road. This is not a telephoto lens. We were right up close and personal with the animals. Also at Theodore Roosevelt Park is the cabin that Roosevelt built when he was living out there. It has lasted because it's made of ponderosa pine, which most people could not afford to buy. Roosevelt obviously had money to do it, and some was also found floating down the river. And he was able to make that house that survived. Has been moved a number of times back to close to the original property where it started. This is in Big Bend National Park. I have to think here. Big Bend National Park in Texas. Dick is over 6 feet tall, and you can see him beside the century plant, which is much, much taller than he is. It was, they only bloom once in their lifetime. It's not always necessarily a century, but it's a long time. And so this one would have died by now. This is Carlsbad National Park in New Mexico, which was found because of the bats. Those are all bats in the sky, and they come out at dusk to feed on the mosquitoes. There are a lot fewer now than there were even when we were there a number of years ago because of DDT, which has been banned and which is still used where they breed in the wintertime in Mexico. And so there aren't as many bats as there were. This is at Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas. Our two boys are there making hot chocolate with water that's coming from the hot springs being piped up into that fountain. And they just put the chocolate mix in their cup and made hot chocolate. We were there, obviously, to see the baths that are quite noted, but we kind of liked the different experience of making hot chocolate. Here we are at Glacier National Park in Montana. We were there 2 years ago as well. This was a number of years ago, and we had these beautiful views of the lake and the mountains. When we were there most recently, the forest fires were in full force, and we had no views like this, and we're only able to go a few miles on the Going to the Sun Road, which is one of the most famous scenic drives in the country. I think we could go 17 miles. We were still able to camp, but there was smoke in the air. Here is Mount Rainier, where we were hiking down a trail in the snow in August, and next to us, or just over within view, there were people skiing in shorts and t-shirts. This is the whole rainforest at Olympic National Park. Very green, very beautiful. When we were there, obviously it's a rainforest, so usually there's a lot of rain, which makes everything green. Everything was still very green, but we had no rain at all. We camped for a week and packed up a dry tent. You never know what you're going to find. This is Crater Lake National Park, where the water is just as blue as what you're seeing on the screen. It is very deep, very clear, and really beautiful. It's a caldera from a volcano from long ago. This is one of the parks that became a national park just last year. This is Indiana Dunes. When we were there, it was Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore. Now it is a national park. It has several different features. Besides the dunes on the shore of Lake Michigan, there are also some houses that were on display at the 1938 World's Fair in New York, in Chicago rather, that had features that were up and coming things like air conditioning and clothes dryers and washing machines, things like that. And one house that had a garage for an airplane. I think that's the only one that hasn't become in common usage. Here we are in Hawaii. This is on top of Haleakala, where we went up early in the morning to see the sunrise. This is another park that is so popular now, they've had to limit. You have to sign up and pay, I guess you pay, sign up to get permission to drive up to see the sunrise because so many people want to do it. People also go up, have bikes trucked up, and then they ride down this high mountain on their bikes. That's not a national park, that's Australia.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, we'll go to the next one. I don't know why Australia was in the middle there, but here we are back in Hawaii. This probably looks a lot like what you would have seen last year or the year before when the volcano was erupting in Hawaii. It's on the big island. This is lava that was all over the place with greenery starting to come back. And there are signs showing you how far the lava had been flowing at different points, different time periods. This is Great Canyon of the Gunnison in Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Is that what it's called? Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park in Colorado. This was one that we almost didn't even stop at. This was years ago, and we weren't on our goal to see all the national parks. But we saw the sign, and we thought, oh, let's check it out. We were there early in the morning, and the visitor center wasn't open yet. So we just started hiking along a trail. I was a little bit ahead of Dick, as often happens, because he's taking pictures. And an animal ran across in front of me. It was the tiniest fawn I had ever seen. It was just adorable. I was wishing that I had a camera. When Dick caught up to me, I said, "Did you see that?" And he said, "Yeah, it was really big." I said, "No, it was really small." He thought it was a hare, a rabbit. That's how small it was. But it was a great hike. This is Arches National Park in Utah. We did some lovely hikes there. It was really hot. It was over 100 degrees when we were there. And one afternoon, I really wanted an ice cream cone. So we drove 45 miles to find ice cream. And it was a wonderful ice cream shop with no one in line. And I thought, if we were at home, there would be a line a mile long getting ice cream. But we got our ice cream cone. We came back and hiked some more with my very favorite experience in Arches was this butterfly, which landed on my wristband. I had bought these red wristbands that I was keeping wet in hopes of cooling my body a little bit, and he landed on my wristband. I said to Dick, "Take a picture, really fast." Well, he didn't have to hurry. This butterfly hiked with me for 45 minutes. The whole time we were walking along. He either liked the water, he liked the color, maybe he liked the movement. He didn't have to fly. This is Capitol Reef National Park that has some really steep places that you can drive through. And you can drive up to a pioneer signature wall where explorers that were traveling through there signed their name on the side of the cliff. This was, Capitol Reef was a Mormon settlement and had some lovely orchards there. But normally you could go in and get fruit, but we were there on the 4th of July weekend, so we missed being able to go in to get the fruit because they were closed. This is Bryce Canyon National Park, which is one of our favorites. The picture does not do it justice. They are gorgeous pink sandstone formations, and they just extend for miles. It seems like miles anyway. And there are some that look like castles. There are some that have other different shapes. We took a moonlight hike at night down to the floor of the canyon and walked right along the bases of all these different formations. And this is Cedar Breaks National Park, also in Utah. We were there in late June. This is the snow that was on the side of the road. The campground had just opened because they had had 18 inches of snow like 2 weeks before we were there. The trails were still snow covered, but they said that we could hike as long as we were careful, and there were orange sticks showing you where the trail was. Zion National Park. And what's interesting is when we did that one, we had done quite a few national parks with similar formations in Utah. We had been to Canyonlands, we'd been to Arches, we'd been to Capitol Reef, we'd been to Bryce Canyon, Cedar Breaks, and Zion. Zion was the last. And I was not impressed. Now, I know this is one of the most popular national parks. I think I was on formation overload because a few years ago we drove through Zion because it was the way the road went wherever we were headed to. And I kept commenting on how beautiful these formations were. So it's the feeling that I get when we've been in France and we go to cathedral after cathedral after cathedral, or Germany and we go to castle after castle after castle, and they start to all look alike. That's how I was feeling at Zion, but it is worth going to. They're all worth going to. This is Yosemite. Beautiful, beautiful land. And Sequoia, where some of the sequoias have fallen down and they've carved out a road so that you can, or a tunnel, so you can drive your car through this tree. Actually, go back to Sequoia for a minute. At Sequoia, we had our first interesting bear experience when we went to bed at night and had just gotten into bed, and we had barely lain down when we heard a shout, "Bear!" Then we heard someone run right by our tent. We looked out our tent window and a man said, "Hi, I'm Joe with Bear Management." He explained that 3 bears had been bothering the campground that summer. A 60-pound female with a purple tag in her ear had just gone up the tree about 12 feet from our tent. The ranger had shot a pepper ball into the next tree. The ball exploded and would make it unpleasant for the bear. Rangers had been trying to keep the bears wild and away from people. Bears can totally destroy a car if they smell or see food or something that resembles food in the vehicle. My adrenaline was really pumping now. I wasn't scared, just excited and kind of alert, listening for the sound of the bear coming down. I never did hear her, but I didn't sleep well. Okay, so now that was Sequoia. This is Redwoods National Park in California, one of the very big trees. And this is Mojave Desert. This is in California. And when we arrived, we went into the visitor center, and the ranger was on the phone answering a phone call. The caller was a woman from Delaware who wanted to come out to see Mojave, but was apparently expecting more in the way of services, gas stations, stores, etc., than are actually available. The ranger repeated herself several times, saying essentially, "No, ma'am, there is nothing here like that. The closest is 50 miles, and so forth. Eventually, the ranger hung up the phone, shook her head, and helped us. We asked for some suggestions on hikes, and she suggested doing the ring trail, since she had taken a group of first and second graders there earlier in the day. I figured that meant I could do it, but it was harder than I expected. The trail went nearly vertical in 2 places, one for about 10 feet and later for another 5 feet, both in a narrow passage between large rocks. To make it easier for mortals to climb that part of the trail, there was a series of 6-inch diameter metal rings on giant eye bolts fastened into the rock. Standing in a ring and stepping up to the next one allowed us to climb, but it was much more difficult than a ladder. And at one point, I couldn't lift my leg. I had to switch feet and lift the other leg. It was quite a narrow opening. There were 2 sets of these rings. One had indentations in the rock for 1 foot and rings for the other. The other had only rings. It was a very difficult climb, but something we remember. Here is Joshua Tree in Joshua Tree National Park. When we went there, fortunately, a friend had told us that there were no Joshua trees in the southern part of the park. And we would have been very surprised as we're looking to see what a Joshua tree looks like. But in the northern part, there were lots of them. We've seen more in other parks than we actually saw in Joshua Tree. Here is a cave, one of many that we have been in. This one is in California. This is at Great Basin National Park, actually in Nevada. And you can see the stalactites and stalagmites. Stalactites come from the ceiling. They stick tight to the ceiling. Stalagmites, with a G, come up from the ground. When they meet, they form a column. Some of them also look like slabs of bacon or other features. This is Channel Islands National Park in California. You take a boat out. This is an arch in the harbor outside the island. There are 8 different islands in the chain. We went to Anaconda, this is called, and to get to the island, you had to go up a ladder and stairs. It was equal to 13 flights of stairs to get up to the island. And you could hike through some beautiful wildflowers and some lots of birds that were there. This is Congaree National Park in South Carolina. When we went there, this was one that we didn't know even existed when we started out on our trip. And then we saw that it was there and we went down. We arrived about 11 o'clock in the morning. We were the first people to arrive in the park that day. We hiked for most of the rest of the morning and the afternoon, had our lunch in the park, eventually made our way back to the visitor center, and were told we were the only people who had been in the park that entire day. That probably does not happen anymore. Parks are quite crowded. And here is a saguaro cactus from Saguaro National Park in Arizona. They start out very, very tiny, like a quarter of an inch tall, and it takes 75 years before they start to branch out. And then the different arms make different shapes as they grow. This is our favorite plant from cactus in the Southwest. This is an Acadia plant, beautiful red-orange blossoms on long stalks. And here is our trip to American Samoa. And I have a couple of stories from American Samoa that I will share with you. First of all, we stayed with a native family through the national park. They give you the list of several different families that are accepting visitors, and then you make your own arrangements to stay with them. So we made those arrangements, but they had forgotten that we were coming. So when we arrived, we had to get help from the people at the car rental place to get us to be able to make a phone call to them. And then they didn't know we were coming, but said to come anyway. So we came. We met them outside a building, and they said that they were playing pinko. We didn't know what that was. It turns out it's the native pronunciation of bingo. So we waited outside a Star-Kissed tuna factory where people were changing shifts, and then were taken to their home to stay. They were, like I said, not expecting us, so we had to wait while they cleaned up the room and explained to us that we would have to use a wrench to turn the water faucet on in the bathroom and to use the water in the tub to brush our teeth because the sink wasn't functioning yet. This was because the tsunami had been there a year before, and they had had a lot of damage and had just recently gotten everything sort of repaired. So one night we went out for a walk on our own, and it was on a national park trail. At 6 p.m., we were near the church, and the bells started to chime the Westminster quarters, like our grandmother clock at home. And then it struck 6. We were going to walk on the trail, but a woman came out of her house with her 3 children and said we couldn't go down there right now. She said something about a curfew, which we didn't understand. She told us that when the bells ring at 6 p.m., everyone is supposed to stop walking or driving on the road until the 3rd bell rings, at which point it is okay to resume normal activity. Apparently, the 1st bell is represented by the set of 6 o'clock chimes. The 2nd bell occurs a few seconds later, and it's not as loud. I had heard that one also, but didn't know what it signified. During the few minutes before the 1st and 3rd bell, people are expected to take time for prayer and meditation. It's kind of like a 10-minute sunset Sabbath. It's spiritual, the woman said. All three kids shook hands with us and introduced themselves. And then the woman said that her 12-year-old son would walk us home when the Sabbath ended. We had to wait until we saw traffic moving. In a couple of minutes, we heard the third bell, along with cars moving in the distance, so we were able to go on. We never understood why we weren't able to continue the walk on the trail, but we decided that we would walk home as they suggested. On Sunday, the man of the family took us to, no, yes, the man of the family took us to church. The woman stayed home preparing the meal. I had thought initially that it was going to be a potluck type meal and there were other people coming, but it was just for us. Now, this is the view from their house, by the way, looking out onto the ocean. This is our meal with them. This is one meal. We had fried chicken, taro leaf with onion and coconut milk. This was all wrapped in foil, which was twisted at the top, and another dish they called chop suey. It consisted of noodles cut into 1-inch pieces in a broth that reminded me of miso soup. There was also something they called chow mein, but it just looked and tasted like noodles in broth with turkey, which was very bony, and cabbage. Bailey had made her favorite dish, baked unripe bananas. They were very dry, were tough in texture, and did not have much flavor. They also offered baked ripe bananas, which were served with some sort of coconut sauce. They had tried to buy breadfruit, a starchy fruit used as a vegetable, but they couldn't get it. Azul had white sticky rice, that was her daughter, which is not traditional. The drink with the meal was a coconut full of liquid, like we had sampled the previous night. The volume of liquid was about 3 cups in each coconut. This time we drank the liquid, but didn't eat the meat. We had spoons and forks, but no napkins. Traditionally, Samoans just eat with their hands. At the end of the meal, Bailey brought out a small plastic dishpan filled with soapy water and a cloth for drying our fingers. So it was a very interesting experience, one that I would highly recommend. All right, this was our first trip to Alaska. The first time we drove to Alaska from New Hampshire and back, 12,249 miles. It is my favorite trips ever, I think. We just saw so many things on the way, both to and from Alaska. This is Anaktuvuk Pass in Gates of the Arctic National Park. It's only accessible by plane, and there's one road that goes from one end of town to the other that has a bus, which when we were there, the children would pay $0.25 to ride from one end of town to the other, just for the novelty of doing it. This is Holgate Glacier in Kenai Fjords National Park. And another picture of the glacier calving. And truly amazing experience to watch it. We were on the ship eating our lunch, watching this when a huge piece breaks off and crashes into the water with a really, really loud noise. It's spectacular. Our next trip to Alaska was the most challenging of any that we have ever done. It was to the remote parks in Alaska that can only be reached by small bush plane. And we had to allow enough time to be able to get to each park and allow for weather, which might prevent us from going on a particular day. Our first stop was at Katmai National Park and Preserve in Alaska. This is the plane that we came on, and we had to walk across that narrow little board onto a muddy shore. And as soon as we got there, we had to go to something called Bear Talk. And have a little talk explaining that we couldn't have any food with us. We usually have granola bars in our pockets and our camera bags and our backpacks. We had to leave all of those behind. The only thing we could have was water because there were so many bears there. And so we did that and we started out. We didn't get very far before a ranger, and they have a very sophisticated communication system with other rangers, said we'd have to come over and wait because there was a bear jam. Bear jam means that the bears are in the way, they have the right of way, and we have to wait. So we waited for a little while, The ranger said that then he could take us on a detour around the shore. So we started out there, got a little ways, and he got word that a bear had popped up, and we had to go back and wait again. As we're waiting, here's the first bear jam. They decided to walk across the street. Now, the rule is that you're not supposed to be any closer than 50 yards to a bear. Rangers were still radioing information when suddenly the bear and two big cubs ambled across the path in front of us. Ironically, they came to within about 30 yards before they passed by and headed toward open territory. Apparently, the bears are not aware of the rule to stay 50 yards away from humans. As they moved out of the way, we went partway down the path, where we had to wait again because of bears close to the bridge. So we saw a lot of bears on that particular trip. From there, we went to Lake Clark National Park, which is one of our favorites also. We stayed in a cabin right on the shore of the lake and walked up that stairway where I am to get to the dining hall. We could see seaplanes right in front of us. We could see the ducks that were around the seaplane. We could look across the lake to see to see the mountains. And all we had to do was walk across the dirt runway where we had landed, and we would be at the National Park office. So it was a really, really wonderful park. One of our top 5 favorites. This is at a dredge at Yukon and Charlie River National Preserve. Here we had landed on a little dirt runway not too far away, and the pilot was waiting for us as we walked out to see the dredge. Dick had to put down branches to make a bridge for us a couple of times because there was quite a bit of water in the way. And then we got to the dredge and we had looked around and we're ready to come back when a ranger came out and said, "Would you like a tour?" We didn't realize there was a ranger there. So of course we wanted a tour, which took quite a long time. I'm sure the pilot was wondering where we were, but he was paid by the hour, so he probably didn't care. And we had a great tour of the gold dredge. This was our final national park. It was number 59 for us. There are now 61, but the 61 we had already been to before they were national parks. They were monuments or memorials or something. This is Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve. It was a copper mining area. And they're still in the process of restoring the buildings. And the last picture that I have is White Sands National Park, which became a national park just a year or two ago. So when we were there, it was a monument. I put it in to show that we have been to all the national parks. So if anyone has questions, have we had any questions come in?
I've had a couple.
Had a couple, okay.
So we've had a comment that one of our viewers, Lincoln, at 5 years old, he was at the Arch in St. Louis. It was a great memory for him.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's one that we wanted to go back to because we liked it so much. And when we went back, we wanted to go to the museum, and the museum was closed because they were doing reconstruction.
Really?
So we went to a building nearby that was also related to the national parks, and it turned out to be equally interesting.
Lovely. Well, that's a good tip. We were wondering, when did you switch from vacationing casually to having a goal of going to all the parks?
After we had been to all 50 states, we needed a new goal. And it was probably in the 1990s. We had started, our first one, Acadia, was in 1977. And I would say it was probably 1993 or 94 that we started the goal of getting to all the parks.
Wow.
And then as we started doing that, we realized we wanted to see not just the parks, we wanted to see the monuments and the memorials and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's quite impressive. Have your children continued your tradition of travel in their lives?
Yes, they have. Our younger son teaches internationally. He and his family are in Hong Kong right now, but they have lived in Egypt, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Venezuela, and Hong Kong. They have 3 children that have traveled extensively with them. Our older son and his wife have done more camping than David and his wife have. But they've done some camping, but they've also done, our daughter-in-law teaches French and Spanish, so they've gone to a lot of places where she can use her language skills. So yes, they have followed through.
So a whole family of not your average travelers.
That's right.
Oh, lovely. How have you seen the parks change for better or worse over your lifetime?
Oh, that's a good question. The parks have changed in a couple of different ways. One, they are much more populated than they were, or visited, not populated, than they were. And some places you have to take, which is a good thing, have to take buses to get to see some of the points of interest. So because there's not enough parking to be able to do it on your own. And there are fewer programs because of funding. When we started traveling with our kids, there would be a campfire program every single night, no matter where we were. Now they tend to be only on weekends, and there are fewer guided ranger tours. We love the ranger talks. If we can do something with a ranger, we really prefer that because we get so much good information.
Sure. We have another question. Do you have any suggestions for camping with kids?
Oh, yes. First of all, let the kids choose what they want to do in a park. If there's a whole choice of things to do, let them lead the way. I know we spent quite a bit of time looking at, what's the book? A bird. Can't think of it. E.B. White wrote the book. Anyway, the kids wanted to see these birds, so we did that. When you're driving with kids, there are a lot of activities you can do. I read many, many, many books out loud. Well, we both did, actually, taking turns driving. And in areas that were really, really hot, we traveled at night, and the kids would sleep in the car. We tried to do as much activity as we could. They needed to be running around, not in the car. Like, we sometimes would eat in the car and feed them one thing at a time so that we could keep driving. And when we would stop, we would eat, but they could run around.
One other thought related specifically to camping is to give them jobs to set up. Set up the tent, set up the padding, unload the car, after a while they got so that they could build a fire, and they would practice that. So doing, assigning them things to do,
We still take our younger grandchildren, who are now 7 and 10, camping each summer, and they do that. The 7-year-old loves pounding in the stakes and setting up the tent, and where the 10-year-old likes building the fire more. But yes.
Lovely. And as a final question, what's next for your travels?
Well, we were hoping this summer to follow the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail across the country. Whether we're going to be able to do that with the virus outbreak is debatable, but that is our plan. We've been to most of the places along that route, but not following the exact route that they took, or as much of the route as we can. So that's our next plan for domestic travel anyway.
Lovely.
And the books can be bought, as Michelle said earlier. They can be bought on Amazon. I have books. If you're a local person and contact me, I have some that I can sell. And Michelle said they're also at Target, which I didn't know.
Yeah.
So,
and how can people get in touch with you?
my website is www.ferentravels.com. And I have I don't use it very often, so let me double check what it is. The Feren, nferen @gmail.com will work.
Great. We'll link that in the description of the video.
Okay.
So if you're interested in more information, you can check out those resources to get in touch with Nancy Ann.
Great. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you for tuning into our video. We really hope that you've enjoyed hearing Nancy Ann's talk. As she said, you can buy her book on Amazon, and you also have it at the library. Thank you again for tuning in. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel, as we intend to put out more live streams for adult programming in the future. Have a good night.